Okay, hello everyone. My name is Ryan Acker. I'm the operations manager here with United Suicide Survivors International, and we are so excited to welcome you all here to be part of our webinar today. We are speaking with Lyseria Phillips, and she's going to be giving us a talk today on pride in construction. And so, in just a moment, I'm going to hand it over so that we can have an amazing conversation this evening as we explore Lyseria's journey. Before we get started, for those who may not know, United Suicide Survivors International is an independent global organization that serves as a home for people who've experienced suicide loss, suicide attempts, and thoughts and feelings, as well as their friends and families, collectively known as people with lived experience with suicide, to leverage our expertise for large scale change. Our mission and vision is to cultivate the lived experience of suicide into action through leadership, collaboration, and advocacy. We envision a world where lived experience becomes the fulcrum that leverages all suicide prevention efforts. And our ultimate vision is to see a day when organizations like ours no longer have to exist. At United Suicide Survivors International, we seek to amplify the voices of survivors through webinars like today so that we can focus on prevention and that ultimately we can create systemic and cultural and policy change. We help people turn their pain into purpose. And so that is why we're here today. We are talking with Lyseria today about her journey and things that we can do to create change. And so, without any further delay, I'm going to go ahead and welcome everyone to our conversation. Lyseria, you said we could ask you a few questions today as we go through this journey. So that's what I'd
Mhm.
love to do. Lyseria has said that if anyone has questions as we go through today's webinar, you are welcome to put them in the chat. You're welcome to put them in the Q&A, and we can go ahead and take those as we go along. But let's go ahead and get started. So the first question that we had talked about is really, can you tell us about your story and your experience as a survivor?
Sure. I am 40 years old as of yesterday, actually. And I am a union electrician. I've been a union electrician for about 14 and a half years. And about 4 years ago, I realized I needed to transition. I realized I was transgender, and that was a really scary time because it was such a powerful realization. But at the same time, I work in a very um, non-traditional space for women, a very hyper masculine space. The construction industry is not easy on the body. Don't get to dress up in anything other than jeans. But there's also a lot of um, ideas on what um, the the mentalities and the type of people who do that blue collar work. And having worked in it for 10 years, I'd heard all the gay jokes. I'd heard all the trans jokes. I'd heard all the horrible statements said about women on a job site. And still, I had to transition. So I started to transition in secret. I got to a point where things were starting to get harder and harder to hide. My body was changing. Um, I think at some point I was in a hoodie in 90-degree weather just to hide the fact that my body was shifting and changing under my shirt. I like to say that there's only so much titty you can hide in a t-shirt before it becomes very recognizable. But around that time, I started to have a lot of fear, and I started to take I started to mentally think of the harassment I had already received just being a slightly quirky, then presenting male electrician, someone who wasn't into football, didn't talk shit about my wife or my girlfriend. Um, I didn't have kids, but I didn't really complain about kids. Um, and I took that harassment and in my mind just quintupled it. I was like, I will be tortured at work. I started to panic and try to find alternative avenues to work. Being a union electrician, there's not very many places where I can get paid anywhere near my rate on a normal day, let alone as a transgender woman. And my mental health just started to collapse. I started to panic. I started to freak out. And ultimately, I ended up on the roof of my building. And the only reason I'm still sitting here today is because my best friend at the time happened to be home, chased me up to the roof, and screamed in my ear, "Don't you fucking leave me." And without that, I would not have been here. It was a scary time. It wasn't the last time that I made an attempt on my life, but it's definitely the one that's so stark in my mind. I have since come out at work. I actually emailed my union first and said, "Hey, I think I'm the first transgender person nationwide in the IBW." I literally thought I was the first one. Come to find out, not only was I not first nationally, I wasn't even fourth locally. This was an issue they'd handled before. They actually understood and they had processes to deal with it. Um, and then I emailed like the company HR just to say like, "Hey, I'm trans. What do I do?" And I got kind of the most nonchalant, "We're in California, just go change the settings and your worker profile, stupid." Like, it's not a big deal. And it was just such a shock because I felt like I was going to be faced with what in my mind could have only been like a living hell. And had I known any of that, had I seen any of that, had I had any representation, I might not have ended up where I was. But I did because I didn't see anything, and my life could have been cut short before I got to where I am now.
Well, I thank you for sharing that, and I appreciate what you're saying about the importance of why we're having this conversation today, so that other people know that there are some really powerful things in place, and people like you who are already paving the way. One of the things that we've talked about a little bit is that there are some things that are changing in our world right now. So, how are some of the changes that are going on in our country impacting you or your community?
I don't think there's a trans person in the country right now, and I live in California, so I'm probably one of the safest ones, but I don't think there is a single one of us that isn't afraid. My current plan is to stay and fight against these just absolutely crazy rulings and policy changes that are happening, not just in our country, but starting to happen abroad. But I would be completely honest that I have my own plans and my own go bag and my own how we flee if this turns much, much, much darker. Um, but my community, like a lot of my coworkers who were sad about the election, a lot of my straight male coworkers were sad and they were bummed, they were worried, but they hoped that they would get like the no tax on overtime, which doesn't affect them anyway, or that they might just see a couple of things like a couple of immigrants might lose their job or something, and that was all they really were stressed about. But my community sent around suicide hotline numbers and was sending around like messages to each other saying like, "We're gonna be okay. I'm here. What do we need? How do we plan?" Like, we really got together and started like planning and preparing, and quite a bit of doom scrolling and doom looping and all sorts of things like that. It was a very dark time. I unfortunately had I had bottom surgery, which is a 6-month recovery time. That's the colloquial term we use for surgery for vaginoplasty. And I was laid up in bed from January 6th all through the inauguration, and seeing just every single law come down was just hard. And there was definitely a couple times in that period where like my previous inclination to not be here anymore popped back up for moments. And thankfully, I have my partner now. I have my community that has really like banded together to be there for each other. Um, some of the people in the construction industry even reached out to make sure I was okay because they hadn't heard from me in a couple days. So we aren't alone. I keep urging my trans brothers and sisters to remember we aren't alone. Um, we have people out there who are supporting us. It's not like it was necessarily back in the 70s when it was us versus the world. More of the world understands us. And so I think there's a lot of hope out there. There's a lot of fear and a lot of terror, but I see the hope out there. I see when someone puts something bigoted in a Facebook group about trans women on a construction page, and the amount of women in the construction industry who come out in defense of it is just beautiful.
Thank you. And I just really appreciate you sharing your story today with us here and spreading that hope, which I think is the important thing that we do together. When we talk about suicide, we talk about all communities and impacting all communities, but there are disparities in communities like you mentioned. So there are disparities that we see in the LGBT communities and particularly the transgender community, but we also see disparities in the construction industry as a whole. And so here you are representing two communities that face these kinds of disparities. And so, can you talk to us a little bit about the challenges that impact both of these communities, the challenges that people might need to be aware of?
Sure. I know we have a lot of statistics out there now about suicide and how certain identities factor into how likely someone is to actually make an attempt on their life. For construction, people in construction, we're finally accepting the fact that someone working in the construction industry is 4 times more likely to commit suicide than someone who isn't not in that industry who works in an office. As well as being someone who is transgender, transgender people, I believe it's 19.1, but they're 20% more likely to commit suicide than someone who is cisgender. And those numbers don't come together to add. They actually multiply. And so as someone who is in the construction industry and is transgender, especially being a woman, I am something around 80% more likely to commit suicide than someone who isn't. And those are massive amounts of numbers. Those numbers are incredible when you think of just how likely the average just teenager is to go through those things. Um, and it can be really hard, especially as someone who is in the construction industry, to find spaces to talk about our issues. One of the things that comes up the most in a lot of support groups for trans people is that almost all of the ideas and all the tips, especially being in a blue state, are centered towards talk to HR, get HR involved, go talk to whoever's in charge of the office, set up barriers between you and your coworkers. And that doesn't really necessarily apply to our industry because for us, there really isn't an HR. Like, I work in an industry where it is something we're trained to do sometimes is if your boss and you are in a disagreement, you tell them to fuck off and walk away. And it's not quite the same thing for someone in an office. You can't do that. But at the same time, that also opens up a whole bunch of advocacy for yourself. You can somewhat stand up for yourself in this field, but you still don't have the support groups. And so thankfully, there's a lot of support groups for people in the construction industry that have like opened the door for us, not just for transgender people, but just women's spaces too. I'm excited next month to go to a conference called Trades Women Build Nations. My first time was 3 years ago, and I was nervous because I was like, well, I'm a trans woman going to a women's conference for construction. This is going to have women from across the country. What if some of the women who are from more southern red states just absolutely reject that I'm there? And that's not what I experienced. The doors were wide open. There was a sisterhood in the space. And that opened up so much joy for me and so much care and so much love that I was immediately inspired to be back into advocacy and pushing for that greater representation because representation is a lack of representation was the thing that almost killed me. And so I think we're slowly getting there. Like I said, when I came out to the local union here, I literally thought I was the first person nationwide who was transgender. I was positive of it. And by the end of a year, I was connected through different social groups and support networks, and one I even helped start that we found just in my union alone, the electricians union on the IBW, We found 97 other transgender people nationwide. A lot of them up in Washington, a lot of them in Portland, but some in Alabama, some in Georgia, some in Tennessee, and I literally could not imagine that that was the case during the darkest hours, but it is. And those are just the ones we found. That's not the ones who decided to go stealth, which for those who don't know that term, that is when a transgender person basically passes, they appear to pass as a cis woman and then allow themselves to be viewed that way. Not all of us do that, but how many more of us out there are like this? It's growing, and I think people are starting to understand us the more they get to know us.
I think we have a question in the chat, and this question I think I'll kind of ask you this one first, and then we'll go into that one. Um, you had mentioned that there were some things in your organization that when you had this conversation, people did right. And so, what are the things that happened in your job site and in your community that people did really well?
So I think one of the first things that made me think that I could do this, that um, really hammered home for me, was an email I got from the business manager of the local union, which is essentially the Hyatt, like that's our president essentially for the local union as far as the actual office goes. And like the email I sent was one that you could feel the fear coming off of that email. You could just sense how terrified I was. And the email response I got back was like, "You're not alone, sister. We're here for you. We've got your back. Like we've been through this before." And then they immediately said, "I want to connect you with some other people who are like you who if you're okay with it." So connecting us with people like us, it goes a long way. There's another one of the biggest one easily for me was the stuff that happens in the background that you don't notice. I when I first came out on the job site, so I came out at my union, I told them, but I didn't really come out on the job because it's a different group of people. And it's not like I can come out on my job and if something doesn't work out, I change companies. It's the same people, the same group. And I showed up at my job site, a different job site, different name, and I was scared. And what had happened was I found out I had my foreman, he gave me my tools, my assignment, and everything. I'm sorry, my cats are fighting up there. Um, but I got my tools, I talked to the foreman, was given my job assignment, and put to work. And for me, that was just the normal day. Um, Come to find out, my foreman actually gathered our entire rest of my crew behind my back and said, "Hey, we've got a transgender woman on our job site. If any one of you fucks with her, I'm sending you back to the union hall," which is firing them. And apparently, he also then walked into the general contractor's office and told them basically the same thing. If someone screws with the transgender woman on my job site, I will see them removed from this job site if it's even if it costs me my job. And I never found out about that until I think about 6 weeks later when I mentioned my apprentice to my apprentice that I was surprised that nothing had happened, that there wasn't like this big hubbub about me. And he actually said, "Oh yeah, no, Brian pulled us all aside and told us do not screw with her because it will cost you your job." And I think for me, the biggest part was that I didn't become something special on that day. It wasn't like I was thrust into the limelight, that my transgenderness was immediately talked about in front of a big crowd while I'm standing there like, please God, let me sink into the ground. Let me just dive into this pile of fresh concrete right here and disappear. But it was that kind of level of support that someone just had my back and someone stopped things before it happened that really helped. I can't imagine the comments I would have gotten on that job site. As someone who was freshly transitioning, I still was kind of in that middle ground where a lot of people would misgender me just because they couldn't tell. You throw a hard hat on, a pair of baggy jeans, and a t-shirt, and it hides a lot. Um, but it made me feel seen when I heard that. It made me feel like I had had the time to prove myself, and I did get to prove myself. And I'll never forget something like that. I will never forget the people who made me feel welcome. My first time going to Tradeswomen Build Nations, they have a reception every time, and I showed up in a ball gown because I was like, I want to show up looking as fab as I can. And from behind me, I heard someone who had brought someone had brought their like I want to say 6 or 7 year old daughter with them just to show them powerful women in the trades. And I'll never forget that girl going, "Mommy, mommy, look, it's a princess." And they they supported it. The mother of that little girl came up to make sure I'd heard it. And a different tradeswoman came up to me like weeks later and said that hey, I got a picture of that when it happened. Do you want it? And so it was all those little moments that I don't think people ever realize. They seem so small to some people, but just those moments made me feel not just wanted, but accepted and loved, I guess. Like it's one thing to have seen a little girl say that. It's another to have people recognize that I might want that photo because it was probably special for me. And so I think that stuff goes a long way towards just feeling accepted.
I think one of the questions that came up, you've shared some really amazing and powerful things that, that happened to you on your journey on the job site. But one of the questions in the chat was, what could have happened? What would have been helpful at the beginning, during your apprenticeship, or during when you even started, that would have made you feel like the company and the organization was LGBTQ plus friendly to begin with, so that you never had to worry about that while you were there?
So I think something that can be done is one, just having LGBTQ spaces. I know specifically with the IBW, and I know it's common, the versions of this are common across a lot of different building trades unions, is they will have like a minority caucus. Ours is the electrical worker minority caucus. And we are technically considered as LGBTQ people under that minority umbrella, which is true. But the words attached to that don't really necessarily convey that that's queer friendly. But every apprentice gets told that space exists. They get told that a women's committee exists. They hear about the various different programs as they're starting the apprenticeship. And I think if there were LGBTQ caucuses in these unions or spaces similar to that, and they were told early on, hey, this space exists for you, um, that would go a long way. I happened to be at a union meeting once, and I was just speaking about something Pride at Work had done. And as I walked away, um, this young man chased after me to say that he wanted to join the organization and really like work with us and talk with us. And then he whispers, "Because I'm a trans man." And I would have never had any idea, but I, as someone who never saw that before I started advocating for it, cannot imagine how different the entire industry would have felt to me had on my first union meeting where I got sworn in to be a union member, seen someone speaking about LGBTQ issues and speaking about going to Pride and stuff. Like, I think if with these bigger organizations, I think just having those, we joke that a lot of companies having Pride meetings and going at Pride parades isn't as somehow not important, or it's just rainbow capitalism. But for some of us in these spaces, especially when it comes to like union spaces, these organizations that are built around worker solidarity, without those spaces, we might not think that there is that such a space if we aren't told. the day I was told about Trades Women Build Nations, it was by another woman who was in the trades, and she's like, "You should go." And I was like, "Wait, you want me as a trans woman to go?" And it seems so simple, but to me, that was them saying, "You are a woman. Duh, you should go to this thing." Like, it was acceptance without someone going and saying, "I accept you." I think all the most powerful ways for someone to support a transgender person, especially in non-traditional employment for women, is kind of it's kind of like that meme. It's like, tell me you accept me without telling me you accept me. And it's all those small, tiny, little supportive ways that just mean the world to us. It's reaching out. It's when someone who is openly transgender comes out and mentions it, and the first thing the labor union does is go and say, "Hey, I want to connect you if you're willing with these other people who understand your experience." And I think all those small things really mean a lot, especially in an industry where we are so much more likely to harm ourselves.
I think thank you for saying, how powerful the visibility piece is. Just knowing that when you see that there are resources available, the words that people use, visibility, I think is what I heard you say is really important. One of the things that you had talked about is being connected to organizations. And so what are some of the organizations and resources that you have found along the way that might be helpful to others, or that people listening might be able to connect with as well, whether that's for the transgender community or for the construction industry?
Well, first, I want to, something you mentioned about visibility and the words you used, I want to jump back to that for a moment and I'll come back and answer that question. But the first person I told on a job site was actually because someone had used words that I understood. She had mentioned that her child had been going through some gender dysphoria. And just hearing that word, just hearing the word gender dysphoria, like the phrase, sorry, the term gender dysphoria, um, I was immediately like, wait, this is someone who understands my issue. This is someone who knows my terminology, knows all this. And I think about after working up to it for about an hour and getting no work done, by the way, like just being completely unable to focus on the work I was doing, walked up to her and said, "Hey, so I'm like your kid. Like I'm in the same situation. I'm transitioning." And we did it all through code because we were still on the job site, but that was the first person I told at work. And so yeah, that the words you use and the subtle ways that you just talk about the community and support and trying just having that knowledge makes you feel so much safer. To go back to the parts with like organizations, I am very proud to be part of one, which is Pride at Work. It's a national part of the AFL-CIO, which is kind of the union of unions. It's what we use to like, enact change nationwide. And there are chapters all across the country, and I highly recommend people get involved in it. Our purpose is to increase LGBTQ representation within unions, and some of that is making sure that the policies statewide are conducive to queer people joining unions. Some of that is making sure unions just know to use the right language and the right terms when they come to like bargaining agreements. One of the biggest things I do as the president of a chapter is when a union is up for contract, they send me their contract and they're like, can you help us make sure this is gender neutral? And can you help us when it comes to like what medical things are recommended, what things are needed, what things are we missing to attract people who are LGBTQ to our field? Sometimes I wish that wish people would just do control F and type in the word he, and anytime he comes up or she comes up, just like there you found some. But um a lot of that is what the stuff we do, but also there's a component of going out into queer spaces and telling them you don't have to work at Starbucks or Walmart. The statistic that always shocks me is the fact that the number two and number three employers of transgender people is Starbucks and Walmart. Why? Because they have this idea that they are places that we can go and work and get health care, and most people don't look at us twice. But those jobs aren't supportive of a good lifestyle. It's going into other industries, it's getting a union, it's and realizing that having a union contract makes you equal to every other worker you're working with. Like as a union electrician, my wage is the same as every cisgender woman, every cisgender man, every gay man, straight man. Like, I have a union contract to back me up. And that's a good feeling. If I have a problem with a contractor, if someone harasses me on a job site, I have a phone number to call.
Thank you. I there was a question that came, and I think, and I have a couple more, but this question is really relevant to what you're talking about right now, which is, in your role of reviewing these contracts, how do you incorporate mental health supports into those union contracts as you're going through that for the transgender community, but also for the construction and electrician community as well?
Yeah, I think one of the things with the contracts generally don't cover specifically like healthcare. Those are usually done after the fact from my experience. So those are contracts, but the contractor still has like um a say in how those are assigned, but generally it's more like there is a trust that votes how to use the money that the employees negotiate in the contract. So to give an idea of how the contract works, like the contract assigns a certain amount of money to health and welfare, to how much you'll take home on your check, what's going into retirement, and then there'll be a trust that handles the details. And at least in the IBW, those trusts are usually half contractor, half our people. And I think lobbying those trusts to really have mental health components, not just mental health components in general, but like having it so that transitional care is covered, because some of that is going in to see a therapist for your letters to transition if you choose to do a medical transition. And not every insurance policy covers that. But what our experience has actually been, and something I'm proud to hear that Pride at Work sort of pushed to do this research a couple years ago, was they researched how much it costs to get those transitional and gender affirming care added to union healthcare plans. And on the vast majority of them, they found it was pennies on the dollar. Like pennies. So if you're paying on like some union healthcare plans cost upwards of $9 to $15 per hour you work. And we were talking about adding pennies to that, in part because those surgeries and those transitional procedures are so rare when it comes to the field that it was just like a no-brainer. So when we lobbied those entities and pointed out the fact that like we can't attract good people without having these things, we can't touch this community and have this community come and join the field, which would only grow our market share without having these things in place. And we were expecting a fight, and most of the time it's been a unanimous vote to support. So it just takes, in most cases, someone just going and saying, hey, can you cover this? And for a lot of these union organizations, the only reason they're not covering it is because no one has asked and no one thought of it. There wasn't an advocate, there wasn't a Lyseria going and harping on them about making sure it was done.
I think that's really powerful, and I appreciate you sharing that for whatever community someone is representing, being able to say, "Hey, we really need to look at mental health care, gender affirming care, all of those things in that contract. There needs to be someone who says we want to add this." And I think from what you're saying, it's likely that will happen. We just need people to speak up as we're doing it. So thank you for asking that question in the chat. One of the things that I think, when we're talking about the construction industry and we're talking about the transgender community, what are some things just as human beings outside of any particular industry, what can we do as humans to help people in the transgender community and the construction community feel more supported just as people?
Well, I think one of the this is always such a hard one, I think, for a lot of people because our instincts are to immediately go up to someone and say, "Hey, I support you. I support your people." And um, unfortunately, for part of the transgender community, we are always hoping that no one notices we're transgender. For me, I'm very open about being transgender. I talk about it all the time. I'm an advocate for the policy changes. I'm also 6'3", so passing is probably out of my normal realm. Um, but there's nothing worse than having someone come up and just walk up to you and say, "Oh my God, I support trans people." So don't do that. Support trans people, but don't just because that for me that immediately says, "Hey, I notice you're trans." And a lot of us, for that feeling, it's like, well, crap, I failed. And is my makeup wrong? Is the way I'm walking wrong? We started us down a spiral. But there's some really good ways to kind of do similar things without actually having to say the words. Like I was saying before, it's like, tell me you support trans people without actually telling me you support trans people. And I always tell people compliment someone on something they chose. You see a trans person and maybe they're having a rough day, but they got like blue hair or something, and you just go up and say, "Hey, I love your hair." That's the best feeling because for a lot of us, especially when it happens to be something like for trans women, something femme they chose, or um, if it's like a trans man has like just is wearing this like dapper outfit and they just look good, like telling them that, like that's one of the most gender affirming things. And your mental health, I kid you not, is better all day. It is better probably the whole day, the whole week. You keep going back to that. It never quite gets old. To this day, someone walks by and says like, "I love your blue hair," and it's like, "Oh my God, thank you." And then I'm on high for like a good 2 or 3 days. You can ask my wife; she knows. Um, and beyond that, I think when it comes to especially the construction industry, it's like having their back and just treating them like they belong, like treating them not like they're different. Um, Making sure they have the right tools. Don't necessarily come up to them and ask them if they need help every time, but um, if they clearly are struggling, help them. Don't point out they're trans, just help them. Um, it really is just about making sure that we feel like we're accepted. Um, and I think one of the best things, if like we're gonna screw up, I'm transgender, and one of the hardest things that it was one of the hardest things for me to internalize was the fact that people are gonna make mistakes, but that people make mistakes normally. In my early days, it happens less so now. Anytime someone said he instead of she, it was heartbreaking. But the worst is when people go and like immediately turn it into, "Oh my God, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." And they start patting you on the back. I'm like, "I'm really sorry." And dragging this out into this long apology, not helpful. Um, but what is helpful is just something along the lines of shit, fuck, I'm sorry, and then correct yourself and move on, and just get back to like normality. You can't stop that from hurting, but not dragging it out helps you find normal, helps you find your feet again, and it we can tell when people are doing things maliciously versus they screwed up. Like I still misgender myself sometimes in my head. My best friend has a hamster. I was there when we got it, and I misgender the thing all the time. So I should know what gender it was, but it's I think there's a lot of grace and I that's needed, but I think transgender people too have to have their own sense of grace with the people who are trying to do better because for a lot of us, we live it 24/7. They everyone else we're interacting with lives it whenever they see us, which may only be like a couple minutes or hours a day, and so they're behind us. They're doing what they can. And I think there are a lot more people out there who support us and just don't know how versus people who really don't like us. And I think the vast majority of people who don't like us have just been listening to a certain news channel I won't mention, so we'll leave Fox News out of it.
I think one of the things that is so powerful about what you're saying is that you really identified, two things that I think that you said would be helpful for people, but I think that are very human that would kind of help us all. So I heard you say, complimenting, but hearing people say something nice every once in a while helps people and making sure people feel included. And I think those are powerful messages for communities who are disparately impacted, but really for all of us. So thank you for saying those things. One of the things that we had talked about kind of before today's webinar was a little bit about sometimes, you mentioned kind of there are some people who you've heard, the difference between someone maybe just meeting people for the first time or people being a little bit malicious is that sometimes there are people in rural communities who maybe have never met a transgender person, or they don't believe that they have. And so we talked about this opportunity to say, what are some of the common questions that you get that might be helpful for people to know, when they believe that they haven't met someone who's transgender? What would help people better understand people that they haven't met yet?
Just to clarify, you mean like what questions should they ask the trans person, or what questions should they ask the world?
I think what are some of the questions that people might have when they're coming, when they're coming to meet transgender people for the first time, and what would be some of the answers that you would give to people just so that they would know a little bit more?
Well, I think there's so many interesting things about being trans. Like I'm transitioning for me, and I'm a bit more of a science-minded person, um, which is weird saying because I'm also a practicing witch. But there's so many there's so many scientific things with like how interesting the body changes. A lot of people have this idea that everything about me that makes me female is some sort of plastic surgery, and it's not. A lot of the way my face looks is just changing out the hormones, swapping out the hormones. Not all transgender people go and um, transition medically. Not all of them do the same medical procedures. Not all of them, um, not all trans men get rid of breast tissue. Not all trans women get breast tissue added. Um, and so there's really a diversity. There's no right or wrong way to be trans. We throw a bunch of terms around that are sort of generic, bottom surgery, top surgery, but these are more just like ways that like we communicate. One of the most interesting tidbits I wish more people understood was that my chest grew primarily on its own. And that's what was so scary about hiding it in a hoodie was like at any point the curves are going to be there. And that just came from swapping out one hormone for another. Um, Also, your skin when you transition male to female actually gets thinner. I Not to make a joke about women having thin skin or anything, but like I discovered freckles that I never had before. Like my shoulders are covered with freckles. That was just not something I lived with beforehand. So there's so many little physical changes. It's like coming to understand the human body so much more when you understand that there are all these different little blueprint parts. But one of the things I would say is never ask those physical questions of a trans person who isn't open about it. A lot of us don't want to talk about our bodies. Um, Open-ended questions, especially if you're trying to learn about a transgender person, generally go over well. Um, some of the best questions I've heard is how I knew. Um, and for me, I just told my story about how I told my best friend, like how I turned around one day in a chair and said, I need to do this. That I had talked myself out of it for decades, telling myself that I'm definitely not trans, or I'm not trans enough to go through the pain of giving up my family and my job and everything. Um, don't go and ask people um, if they're going to get any specific surgery, because for a lot of people that's not the goal, or that might be very careful about the way you ask those questions if you do end up asking those questions. I've only once had somebody ask me if I was going to chop my dick off, but it was not a fun experience to have someone ask that. Um, And it really makes you feel reductive, like your identity as a transgender person is only related to that sexual organ. I think for those in the construction industry too, we are not used to having conversations in ways that are through a sanitized corporate filter. Anybody who's worked in blue collar or has had extensive interaction with blue collar workers knows that it's a different language set. Um, there's a lot more swearing, there's a lot more bluntness. And sometimes that stuff is amazing for communicating with your workers and getting to know them. But sometimes it's really hard when you want to just ask how someone is going to handle the changes in their body or um, if someone is planning on doing X, Y, and Z. There's a huge difference by saying the words, "Oh, are you planning on having bottom surgery or are you going to chop your dick off?" Those are very, very strongly different things with, and one definitely, the latter very much conveys this sense of like derision versus one that sounds educated. Um, but I would say don't ask any one singular transgender person, especially one in the construction industry, to explain being transgender to you. Learn from transgender content creators or watch videos by them. A lot of us are just the same. We're just trying to deal with this additional thing that our lives have. Like the Wachowski, I think I'm saying that right. The Wachowski sisters are still the same filmmakers they've always been. They just transitioned. I don't think the more recent Matrix films were that good, but they still they're still the same people. And so I would say be very careful with the questions you ask, but that's not to say don't ask those questions. One of the best questions I got from an apprentice, and it took him months to work up to it, was how did I know? How did it feel? What does it feel like? What are some changes? Like someone asked me like in a really positive way, wanting to know how certain things feel different. At least in particular, things not having to do with my genitals. Um, they go a long way. Like someone asking me how having long hair feels versus what I had before, like that to me feels like someone who's genuinely interested in me and not interested in this idea of transness as a whole. Um, yeah.
Well, I think that's really helpful. I think just, what I'm hearing you say is being mindful that we're in any conversations that we have that we're talking to another human being, and that some of those times those questions, how we phrase things is important. I think one of the things that I heard you say too is that doing some research at places that are designed to provide that information is really helpful. So I know one example of an organization where people might want to learn more about the transgender community in particular is parents, friends, and families of lesbian, gays, bisexual, and transgender people. People can find that information at pflag.org, pflag.org, where they can learn more about the community, and of course in the construction industry as well. So even United Survivors, we have the construction mental health and well-being conference that comes up every year, and that's a great place to learn about the construction community as well. Are there any other organizations that you would recommend people check out, as they're exploring, if they want to have those difficult conversations, or they want to learn how to be more mindful?
I'm so glad you mentioned PFLAG. PFLAG is by and far my favorite one, especially when you're dealing with children. I know that a lot of their focus is on educating parents of like parents who are in that situation whose children have come out as some form of LGBTQ. Their main focus right now is transgender. Um, but one organization that I really want people to look into, especially if they're asking how can I help? And I'm sure everyone on here is like, they're here because they want to know how they can help. And this organization costs next to no money really to join. Sorry, forgot to put my phone on silent. Um, it's an organization called freemomhugs.org. And from what that sounds like, it's literally what it sounds like. This is an organization of moms and parents who will go to pride events or various other times. Sometimes it's a prom that has invited them or something. And the sole point of them being there is to give, especially LGBTQ kids and young adults, that motherly hug or that fatherly hug that they're probably missing. Um, One of the most heartbreaking things about being in the LGBTQ community as a minority is that we're a minority where we come out later in life, we're found out later in life, and it can often be that our parents abandoned us for being who we are. So a lot of us lose that. And I don't have the statistics in front of me, but someone who loses their parents through their identity loses so much of their safety when it comes to suicide. Like, um, it's just massively increases. I would say the majority of that 20 times more likely for transgender people to commit suicide comes from when their families reject them. And so having that sort of like momentary backup, and sometimes it's not momentary, sometimes connections are made in those moments where you just get that hug from someone who feels like your mom for a moment, changes everything. I have a stand-in mom, and that reminds me of another one. There's also one called Stand in Pride. I think it's standinpride.org, which was created by a man who just said he'd go to someone's wedding because her dad wouldn't show up because she's gay. And so he got to play dad for the day. And there's a lot of organizations out there that are very supportive. If you're looking to give money, of course, the Trevor Project is always a great one. They are actually the ones who ran the LGBTQ suicide hotline. We used to call it option three. So if you called 988, option three used to be for an LGBTQ trained counselor. And unfortunately, the government got rid of that, but California is still funding the money so that the Trevor Project can run their own hotline. I don't have the number in front of me, but hopefully we can add it to the notes for this. So there are ways out there to be a part of it. The biggest thing you can do, if those organizations don't work out for you, is just be there for someone. Um, Even I've spent most of my time since the inauguration telling union people and union labor councils that if you want to do something and you don't have a lot of capacity, if you know there's a queer person in your life, check on them. Make sure they're okay because there is a lot of hidden signs and there's a lot of people hiding our pain right now because we're so used to being in it. And just that one phone call, that can be the difference. That can be literally the difference between someone feeling really, really bad that day and considering doing something and them just feeling like, wait, someone cares. Um, the middle of some of the horrible, horrible things that have come out of the current administration. I think this was in like, I want to say February or March, some massive law came out. I think it was the one with the passports, and I was laid up in bed. I hadn't spent a lot of time. My partner was at work, and I was just feeling terrible. And out of the blue, I got a phone call from one of the labor leaders from a different union. Um, and he was just like, "Hey, I saw this bill go through. I just wanted to check on how you're holding up." And that made me feel so seen and so cared about. Like that right there was like somebody knows I'm in pain. Someone can feel that I should be in pain for this, and they did something about it. Um, and I think I saw just a blip. Someone actually put the new hotline up there. Did I see that correctly?
Yes, thank you so much for sharing. It's 866-488-7386.
Yeah. And to give people an idea on why those specialty counselors are so important, I actually called 988 or its predecessor. I forget what it was in 2020. It might have still been 988. Um, and I got the regular line, and the suggestion I got when because I was facing my status as a queer person was I got asked if I'd considered not being queer if it was hurting me so much. And that didn't help at all. It's like, have you considered just not being 6'3"? Like it's it's that kind of a named question, and having a counselor who knows how to talk to you about your issues is so important. Uh, so please, yes, if you feel like donating money to our project's a great one. Free mom hugs if you feel like being a volunteer, if you feel like getting out there and having that person to person connection. P flag is a great one if you're trying to learn.
Lyseria, I want to say thank you so much because you have really shared your journey with us and your story with us today, and it's powerful knowledge. And I just want to honor you for being vulnerable with us and telling your story, and everyone in the chat today who's asked great questions and provided some additional information. I think one of the things that we, in addition to finding out what we can do to make things better, is to think about hope. And one of the things that you have talked about is hope. And so I think one of the questions here is what is it that you do that you foster and nurture hope within yourself that other people might be able to learn from as well?
Well, I spend a lot of time with people that matter. I'm I had just married my beautiful, beautiful wife. She wasn't my wife when I married her, so I guess I married my girlfriend of 2 years. But I spend a lot of time with her. I spend a lot of time being vulnerable, but I also you have to find out what works for you. So what I say here won't necessarily work for everyone else, but for me, I got involved. Not having that representation was terrifying and it was life-threatening, literally, for me. And so I have found a lot of solace and a lot of energy in being that person to go out there and really advocate for people, and it feels good. It feels like I'm doing something. It feels like I'm pushing something in motion. But I also make sure that I have time. I've learned my breathing exercises. Our apartment now has trees around it, so it feels nice and grassy. You probably saw the cats running around, so spending time with them. But beyond that, I find myself doing a lot of I do a lot of hopeful like adventure books. It's like I would like the hopeful things. I try to remember that things will get better. Because if I'd listened to that voice on that rooftop telling me to jump, like I wouldn't be here speaking with you. I wouldn't be part of the LGBTQ caucus for the California Democratic Party. I wouldn't be a board member of an organization trying to help prevent suicide. And I wouldn't be married and I wouldn't have the wonderful people in my life. But I think also finding support groups and finding your allies and finding people is important. One of the things that a lot of support groups for transgender people tend to do is isolate. And I think when that happens, you need like a space. You can talk about your issues, but when they isolate themselves from the people who actually care, who are also might just be cisgender, I think that that's when they lose out on people that want to be there for them. That's when they lose out on communities. That foreman who stood up for me is my one of my best friends. He will be the one that gives me away at our wedding ceremony in a few months. He's like a brother to me. And he's just a cis straight man. He just believes and understands that we needed a safe space, and he somehow knew in the moment what to do. And he gave me a sense of hope by standing up for me. He he gave me a sense of just that belonging. And I think for everyone out there who says like this is the end, it's all falling apart, it's all things are getting worse. It's like we've been here before. We've been here before a lot, as queer people, and yet we're still here. We're still going, we're still kicking, we're doing all these beautiful things. It's I think too often we get consumed with the fight part of pride. I will probably butcher the quote, but there's a quote from the Harvey Milk era. It might have been Harvey Milk who said it. But the quote was that during the AIDS epidemic, we buried the bodies in the morning, we protested all day, and we partied all night. And it was the parties that kept us going because without them, we would not have had the spirit to do everything else. And I think, especially in these times as queer people, we need to do the things that bring us joy. And I think ultimately the joy is going to be the reason we convince everyone else that we belong. I think a lot of people only see the trumped up versions of angry transgender people on the internet. There's a lot of rage bait. People make us angry, we act angry, and then that ends up being on the cable news for over and over and over again. But I think the ones that meet us and the ones that see us smile and the ones that see our joy and our love and our happiness and spending time with our nieces and nephews, whether they're blood related or not, like, I think that's what convinces people. I think that's what convinced people with the gay and lesbian movement that these are just average people. And I think that's going to be what helps with the trans community. And I live in California. I live within a throw's distance of the San Francisco area. And even still, I am, for the most part, most people I work with, first transgender person. And when they see my hope and they see my joy, and when they see me kick ass on the job site, like, I think it changes what they think of because they might not have been exposed to anything other than that version on the news or that version they saw on TikTok. And now they've seen me.
I think I just want to say thank you again. I think this particular time and this place of sharing your story is important. It's critical, and I just want to say thank you for being here today. I do want to ask in the chat, are there any other questions or any other comments that we have for today? If you do have any, please feel free to go ahead and enter them there. Um, Seeing none, I have two other questions for you to kind of close this out for today. So the first one is there anything else you would like to add that you think we should know about? Is there anything else that you had wish we had asked a question about or
No, I just want people to remember that we're all individuals, we're all trying to survive, and we're also all different. My experience is going to be different, probably from a lot of transgender people's experience. I have been blessed to have not been on the receiving end of any transgender violence. I can't say the same for people I know. I host a panel at a tradeswomen conference, and one of the panelists often still talks about how they carry a giant wrench all the time that they've duct taped and rainbow tape just as a self-defense weapon. Because a lot of job sites have gone to weapons, no weapons allowed, but they still need to feel safe. But I think there's still hope for all of us. There's still hope when you kind of get out there and you support people. I think there's hope in the community. If you're trans, I think there's hope in the cisgender community. If you're LGBTQ, like, I think the straight community has the opportunity to learn about you, and the more they do, the more they're going to understand you. I I think a lot of this, I feel like we're in a battle of attrition where the battle is over how well we're known and how well people know we exist. And I think that's a battle we're winning. It's not easy, it's not casualty free, unfortunately, but I think it's a battle we are winning, and we just have to hold on.
that was pretty wise. But my last question for you tonight is do you have any closing words of wisdom for anybody who might be listening with us today? Your words of wisdom for this evening.
Well, I like to always end any time I'm speaking with a quote. I feel like you're smiling a bit because you know it's coming. Uh, and I'm not someone who reads a lot of lofty books from philosophers who are long dead. Mine's going to be a quote from Final Fantasy 14, a game that actually helped me in some of the darkest times. There's a point in the game where you are literally fighting the embodiment of depression and nihilism. And my quote is, "We will stand against fate, no matter the cost. We've been here before, many a time. Thus do we know to never give up, for hope will shine again." And I'm so honored to have been here. This is my first webinar, and I'm just so happy to be here. Probably not the last, but thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I just want to say just gratitude for being here today, gratitude for sharing, gratitude to everyone in the chat who joined us. Agreed, this was a great and amazing discussion. We are going to go ahead and close out for tonight. Remember, you can always find more information at unitesurvivors.org and some of the websites and phone numbers that we mentioned here tonight. So, again, Lyseria, thank you so much for being here. We wish everybody a fantastic evening, and we're going to go ahead and close out for today. So once again, thank you, everybody, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.